Hello, welcome back to part 4 of 4 of our election coverage this evening. It's our final poll. We're not quite sure how long it'll go on for. That depends on the Loughborough Count, but hopefully in about an hour's time we will know who the next MP for Loughborough will be. In the studio alongside me, on my right hand side is Christopher Leroux, as always. Ben Cooke has returned from his short hiatus, and Joshua Thompson is still here alongside us, the Ipswich boy himself. Lots of news from that short break. We're going to go to the big news first, straight to Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn has resigned as the leader of the Labour Party, not with immediate effect. However, he'll be resigning within the next few weeks or months and will not lead his party into the next general election. He announced that at his result, where he had an enormous victory in his own personal constituency, but obviously that's not translated nationally, has it?
No, sadly not. The BBC have just released their latest forecast, which is predicting the Conservatives on 357 and the Labour Party on 201, which is slightly better than the earlier exit poll, but really is not a very strong showing for Labour. So I can kind of see why Jeremy Corbyn's felt that he needs to say that now. Do
you think he's got any choice but to go?
I think, based on what was being said on social media earlier, there was already growing pressure from senior Labour figures, based on what they heard from the exit poll, saying that this clearly needs to be some change. I think so.
Do you think if the election would happen now he has resigned from is soon to resign from his post as leader of the Labour Party, if the election was to happen tomorrow, do you think it would be different with Jeremy Corbyn outside of that leadership?
As in the vote to happen tomorrow, or campaigning to start tomorrow?
If the vote was to happen tomorrow, if Jeremy Corbyn was no longer leader...
If we were to do this all again...
if we were to restart again, and tomorrow was the election date, Jeremy Corbyn is not leader, but everything else stays the same. The party still in its its left-wing guise after New Labour. Would we see a different result to what we had today?
It's tough to say because we're not in that situation. But I don't think we'd be like that. I don't think we would be, the Labour Party would be in this sort of situation. We wouldn't be looking at the results as we're seeing them right now. I think I was reading a report the other day that was saying that the Labour Party, and Jeremy Corbyn specifically, has had significantly more negative press than his Conservative counterpart, Boris Johnson, who's seemingly continuing to be the Prime Minister.
But would we as a country have the same issues that we have today with the divided nature of our politics, with that left-right divide? Would we see the same thing?
If they were less divided?
No, if Jeremy Corbyn wasn't the leader, if there was a more centrist Labour Party, would we see that antagonism between those two sides?
I think with a more centrist Labour Party, you would stand a chance. I think Labour would have performed better, because I think they would have been able to occupy grounds that is currently not necessarily being occupied by the Lib Dems. I also think that because the Conservative Party has, at this election, shifted so far to the right, that a more New Labour, centrist Labour Party might have done better.
I mean, there was talks of that actually happening by either parts of the Conservative Party and maybe the Labour Party splintering off. And we had the case study of the Independent Group for Change, which was, there was big emphasis on them being a big movement away from traditional politics, but that didn't take off.
It didn't go well at all, to be quite honest.
No, not at all. And it's interesting to hear some comments from Hilary Benn at the moment saying that Labour has to tell the truth. It was Corbyn and Brexit both part of the problem. So maybe, the way voters have viewed Corbyn as a prime ministerial kind of candidate, and their stance on Brexit. And I think the questions will definitely be raised about whether Labour's strategy on Brexit was the right way to go. And personally, I don't think it was.
Sedgefield, a hugely Labour area, a Labour area with that had a majority of 6,000, has been lost to the Tories. Phil Wilson, the now outgoing Labour MP for Sedgefield, said that the party needs to expunge from its very soul the culture of intolerance under Jeremy Corbyn. This is language from someone who is a member of the Labour Party and someone who was an MP only a month ago. This is language that we don't expect to see. Alongside this, obviously Sedgefield itself has gone.
Tony
We've
Blair's
got
old seat, of course.
Tony Blair's seat, which is madness. You wouldn't think that seat would go.
It's a new Labour heartland.
Aberdeen South has been won by the SNP from the Tories. Another Tory loss in Scotland. They're having to make up back in Europe, back in England for the losses they're making in Scotland. Maidenhead, obviously, Theresa May has retained her seat. However, with a large reduction of her own voter turnout there, 7.1% less votes than last time, which is quite a significant amount. Don Valley, Conservative gain from Labour. North East Fife, Lib Dem gain from the SNP, interestingly. So the SNP have lost a seat now in Scotland, which I don't think we said it before, which means that maybe the Lib Dems won't have such a bad night compared to what maybe was expected in that exit poll.
No, that exit poll did quite clearly show that the SNP were expected to make major gains if they've lost seats.
Same time though, the SNP have just gained another one
Well, there you go.
from the Labour Party as we speak. Coatbridge, Krishnan and Bellshill has now gone to the SNP from Labour. And a swing of 7.6% there between the two, with a turnout of 66%.
And you were talking about the Lib Dems, Esher and Walton in southwest London, Dominic Raab's seat, where the Lib Dems hoped to make inroads. He's held it, albeit with a reduced majority of 2.7k. So, yeah.
But going back to our point on the Lib Dems, even though they may not be making significant inroads into actually claiming seats, their vote share is up the highest out of all the parties. So this goes back to issues of whether a first past the post system, or should we be looking to proportional representation as we had in the European elections?
Yeah, we know that the Labour Party have said that they would quite like to see some form of electoral reform. The Lib Dems are obviously extremely keen for it.
Yeah, and of course with some constituencies based on the 2001 census still, so there are still quite a lot of outdated constituency boundaries that need to be looked at.
There we go. Helen Whately of Faversham Mid Kent has been re-elected with 31,000. Boris Johnson may just be winning his seat. He's arriving at his count now. Lord Buckethead and co have been there for a while.
And Count Binface, don't forget.
That's his company, you know. It's the whole
they come as a package.
Do we think
14 candidates.
Do we think there's any chance of Boris Johnson having his majority slimmed?
And it looks like, very quickly, we're going to butt in here, it looks like Jo Swinson has lost Eastern Bartonshire.
That's now confirmed.
It's looking like sources on the ground confirming that she's lost this. We will wait for the count, which will happen imminently. It's looking like it's going to happen. Johnson's count is just about to happen. Alongside this, Barrow and Furness, Conservatives have gained that seat from Labour. There's a lot of seats coming out at the moment. With a lot of
we're at that time of the night where things have really started to flood in.
Yeah, everything is starting to come in. Monmouthshire, David Davis has retained his seat, a 9,000 majority there.
Labour have held. I love I've been having Eccles cakes all evening to try and keep my energy up. It's working all right. Eccles cakes and Red Bull seems to be the solution.
Everyone's been doing a grand job so far.
So earlier we were talking about Count Binface. And his results came in, and unfortunately he's lost his deposit. He only got 69 votes.
Lord Buckethead got more votes than Count Binface.
That's such a shame.
So clearly what we're saying here is that Count Binface can't handle the competition and needs to be a monster raving loony to actually get the votes.
This is the thing, is that unfortunately you can't have new parties and new bizarre candidates coming to the forefront.
Well, of course, Count Binface was an independent, don't forget.
Well, absolutely. But you can't have people challenge.
Did he come stone last? Do we know?
I don't know off the top of my head, no.
Bassett Law, the Conservatives have gained that from Labour. Again, another seat that you wouldn't particularly expect, with a majority of 14,000 in a seat gained from Conservatives from Labour. I'm going to have a look at what what was here before. So Bassett Law, obviously a marginal seat. Labour had a 4,800 majority.
That's an 18,000 swing.
14,000 down.
That is huge. I think that says
I think
a
that
huge amount
deserves
about
a
Labour's
swingometer event. Don't know about
I think it does.
We're not sure of the swing though currently, so we'll get.
Wait, it's 18.4%.
18.4%.
18.4%.
Yeah.
That must mean time for the swingometer.
The swingometer.
It's the highlight of the night.
Where's this one going to be, Chris?
Well, 15 was here.
So it's almost down there, really, isn't it? Yeah.
Almost tier.
Wow, what a swing! What
So
a
Uxbridge
swing
has just
it's been.
declared.
Yes.
So this is the constituency of the sitting Prime Minister Boris Johnson. So his majority is now 7,210, claiming 25,000 votes.
However, the best thing about this entire thing is that not only was Boris Johnson on a stage, he was on a stage with Elmo, Count Binface, and Lord Buckethead. What a world we live in! What a country we live in!
Incredible.
This is the fantastic thing about our democracy: that
It
you can
is.
dress up as Elmo, run as Elmo in an election, and stand next to Boris Johnson for the simple price of £500.
Well, as Queenie T proved here, anyone can run, and she encouraged anyone to run. And as we quite often see in the traditional, in the Prime Minister's constituencies, there is a lot of independents or Monster Raving Loony, Bring Elmo Back, etc. parties running, and it just makes it all a bit more exciting.
So, overall, currently, we are, I'd say, around halfway in currently with 325 results out of 650. The overall Conservative-Labour battleground, in terms of swing on each side, Labour have gained 1 seat from the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party have gained so far, we're about halfway through, 30 seats from Labour. This is looking like that exit poll is going to be almost bang on. Obviously, we have a lot more Labour seats to come and a lot more Conservative seats to come as well, so we'll see how they go. But it looks like it's going to be a bad night for Labour. It's going to continue to be a bad night for Labour for the rest of the evening.
Another Wakefield has been gained from Labour. That's another one you probably wouldn't expect. Majority of 3,000 there.
Yeah. It's interesting to see as well the fallout of this election so far, both economically and across Europe as well. So we've already seen tonight sterling has gained 2.5%. It's now at its highest level since May last year against the US dollar. So if you're going over to the States for Christmas, well, you could see that maybe as an early Christmas present. Might get a cheaper holiday over there, who knows? And yeah, so I think business-wise, there's been talk about obviously the threat of a no deal scenario, and that uncertainty has really hit businesses hard. So now that potentially has possibly been taken off the table. Now we see a Conservative majority most likely to happen tonight. So market reaction is a reflection of not just the result, but of the fact that this majority gives Boris his mandate to take forward his Brexit deal.
I think from Brexit, we look at the pound and the show up of the pound, as you were mentioning. That obviously came down because of Brexit in the first place, which is ironic because it was Boris Johnson himself who was the one who pushed for Brexit during the Leave campaign. But from Brexit, we have a video about the Brexit situation.
Brexit. What does it mean? Does it really mean Brexit? But more importantly, what does it mean for you? The university's here in the LSU Piazza, so we thought we'd have a chat with them and find out more.
All right, so first up, we're chatting with Carolyn, who's going to talk slightly about some of the international students and how they'll be affected by Brexit. Can you explain more what will happen?
Okay, thank you. I'm from the international office at the university, and firstly I should say that Loughborough University has a very diverse student community. We have students obviously from the UK, from many countries across the European Union, and outside the European Union. So we celebrate this diversity, and we always welcome students from across the globe. So that's a key point. For any students, whether you're a current Loughborough student or a prospective student, we do have a section on the International Office website called Brexit FAQs, and in this way what we will do is we have information about any potential changes to tuition fees, students' visas, opportunities to work, etc. So there's a full section on the website which we encourage students to look at, and that will be www.elborough.ac.uk/international.
Let's get a student perspective. So I'm here with the international chair for GRO and Darcy, who is our vice president. So we just heard from the international office. So from an international student perspective, what do you think students are most worried about? What questions do you think they will be coming to ask?
I think a big thing is fee status, because a lot of people will be worried about how their fee status would change. A massive thing as well is employment afterwards, because there are quite a few people that want to stay in the UK for a bit longer and are actively looking for placements or employments now. So I think those are going to be like the main source of questions about how that will change with Brexit.
Fujiro, who is our international chair, talked very much about international students not really being aware of how their fees will be affected, and that being what they're most worried about. So should they be worried? I mean,
no, because if you're a student here already, then your tuition fees won't change over the time you're here. So you'll get the same fees as you would if you were a UK student, if you're a European student. Because you're already registered, that will be the same throughout your entire course.
It sounds like obviously there's a lot the students can do to make sure that they're kind of looked after, but it's a lot to do, especially when you're a student, perhaps in a new country for the first time. So when they need assistance, where are they going? Where are they looking? Who do they come to?
I think they come to us. So we offer individual appointments with students for maybe 45 minutes, an hour, but they can come to us certainly, and we can give them advice, help them with their settlement status applications if it's an EU student. If it's a UK student who wants to just talk to us about maybe going abroad for work placement or Erasmus exchange, that's perhaps something they can come and discuss with us as well. And of course, for all our international students who are here outside the EU, they can also come and chat to us, and we'll give them whatever support and help they need.
And you were saying earlier that you organise this on behalf of the exec to get to the students. So what was the thinking behind it? What message did you kind of want to get out there to the students?
Well, I think organising things like this is really, really important for our international community to be able to ask questions and get their concerns answered. We noticed last year, myself and Anna, the education officer, that there wasn't much going on about Brexit, and obviously it was a high concern for some of our students, so we decided to organise this year. We've got various people, international office, the careers office, people coming down from finance, all here to discuss those issues with students and make sure that they have the opportunity to ask those questions in time for Brexit. But
well, we're joined with VC Bob, and he's graced us with his presence.
Ed, how are you? It's nice to see you.
I'm all right. Thank you very much for asking. It's very, very nice. What are your views, and are you prepared as a Vice-Chancellor for Brexit when it comes, if it comes?
So what I can say is we're doing our best here to support both staff and all of the students. I think one of the real issues at the moment is, no one's really quite sure what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. The most important thing we can do is reassure people that whatever sort of Brexit we have and whenever it happens, I'll give absolutely everybody who's a member of the university community a guarantee that we will do our absolute utmost to support them wherever they come from in the EU if they are not UK nationals.
Okay, and I'm speaking to a few other people. We've found out that for the next 12 months certainly, and hopefully for the 12 months after that, so up to 2021, everything should stay relatively normal and the same for EU students. But after that, it's no man's land. Have the university got any plans for what could be happening in 2021?
So for the university, there are three sets of issues. Number one is not just with students, but with staff. What are the issues around either rights to come and study and rights to remain? And you're right, in the immediate future, that's fairly clear. If you go out 18 months or 2 years, it's not. So our role there is to have as stronger influence as we can on government, whichever political party is in power at that point in time, to make sure that when they're making the decisions, they're in the best interests of people who are at this university. The second one is, of course, we have a very strong research base, and some of our students are PhD students. And it's to ensure that if they have funding for their research, be they PhD students or staff, from European Union funding sources, we can either continue to be part of those funding sources, or the British government will guarantee that they'll back them up. And the final one, which is important, is that just think about the number of students who go on placement. And many of those students go on placement in other countries in Europe. And what I've got to do is ensure that the freedom and mobility allow those students to both go on placements in other European countries, but also they will continue to get paid. Because what I'm not having is Loughborough students used as cheap labour, either in this country or anywhere else in the world?
Oh, very noble. Very noble. Good. A very, very good point to make. And I think you covered most of the things that are going to happen, certainly in the future.
Well, there you go. That's Brexit from the university's perspective. Obviously, with the Conservative victory, likely victory in this election. Obviously, we can't be too presumptive, but it's looking that way. In this election, the vast majority of their plans will probably get through Parliament, including their fast-tracked Brexit. So expect all of the effects that you just heard from university staff to be put into place, and for just to make sure you're prepared and ready for Brexit when it comes. However, in the last few minutes, a lot of shockwaves have come through almost as soon as that video started playing. Jo Swinson, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, the person who said that she would become the next Prime Minister, is no longer an MP. She has lost her seat in Dunbartonshire.
But should we be pleased to know that in St Albans, the Lib Dems have just gained a seat from the Conservatives?
They have that. So it's even Stevens. There we go. But yeah, that is a shock. I think there's a shock for everyone involved in terms of. I don't think. Obviously, clearly the party never thought she would lose her seat. It's historically been a safe seat. She had a reasonably large majority. Nothing huge, but 5,500. You don't expect the leader of a party to lose their seat, especially when they've been campaigning for Prime Minister.
But it's especially interesting based in Scotland because, of course, Scotland voted Remain. So to have a Liberal Democrat candidate be overturned towards an SNP, does that not suggest an independence vote? I mean,
I think it does. I think it signals a lot of what the Scottish are currently feeling because of course at the time when they had their referendum, the Brexit still hadn't been decided. There was an assumption that were Scotland to stay, they would remain part of the EU. Now that we've decided that we don't want in anymore and we'd like to leave, I think the Scottish, rightly or wrongly, would like to have another say on the matter.
Yeah, it's definitely the biggest scalp so far of the night, I think.
I will just clarify, she's not, unlike Corbyn, she's not said that she won't fight the next election.
Interesting.
Obviously, there is very little chance that she will stay on as leader, but she's not actually officially resigned, unlike Jeremy Corbyn, who has indicated his decision to resign later on in this Parliament. Let's face it, it'll probably be soon. Labour will have a conference later on next year, but I'm assuming it'll be way before then that they decide on their leader. Other than that, there's been a lot of Tory seats have been racking up from Labour. Rothervary, Bury South, Lincoln, Penistone, Great Grimsby, all seats which have been taken in the last 5 or so minutes by the Conservatives off of Labour. These are huge sets of scalps from the Tory party.
And following on from that, BBC have just updated their forecast. So this was updated about 10 minutes ago. So now the Conservatives are forecasted to get 365 seats, Labour 196, which is 5 more than the exit poll predicted. SNP down from 55 to 52 now, so there could be some interesting dynamics at play there. And the Lib Dems are on 13, Plaid Cymru on 4, and the Greens on 1, with, interestingly, 19 other seats. So that would be for independent candidates or other parties.
So it does imply that there will be, I think there are 18 seats in Northern Ireland. So it would imply that there is 1 seat somewhere in the country which will be taken under the BBC's model by an independent, which will be interesting to see where that is. I could be wrong. I believe that it's 18 seats in Northern Ireland.
They might be including the Speaker.
That is true. They will be including the Speaker. There we go. No surprises.
That explains that.
Which has already been declared.
Already been declared. Wow, that's more boring even than I thought then. That's sad. I was trying to think it was something fun at least. The SNP have gained Carrick and Cumnock from the Conservative Party. Swing from Conservative to SNP 5.5 there. So this is the problem I think the Conservatives have. They clearly are not battling their corner as the party of remaining within the Union in Scotland. This is where they really need to take seats if they want that supermajority that Blair had back in 97, 2001, 2005. That's where they've got to be getting these seats. The SNP have too many seats for the Tories to really get that kind of supermajority.
Because although they've gained over almost 20 seats overall, they've actually lost a handful from Scotland, and the majority in England they're making up for it by gaining from Labour. So Labour have kind of lost twice because they're not gaining anywhere. The SNP are presumably quite happy because they now have a fairly strong mandate, or it's starting to look like they will have a fairly strong mandate for at least somehow trying to demand a second referendum. considering they've been elected in such
This goes back to those regional divides, doesn't it? Scotland, it's very clear where Scotland's headed. Wales, interestingly, now is voting more Conservative, which I think is a big surprise. And of course, the iconic Labour Northern Wall, which has clearly been broken up.
Interestingly, Plaid Cymru they've done about as well as they usually do. They haven't gained any ground, they haven't really lost any ground equally.
Not yet. Not every seat in Wales has been declared.
That's true. That's very true.
That's the important thing, that a lot of these seats in Wales, especially a lot of the Plaid seats, are very, very close. I think this is something that we'll see very much later on as the Welsh seats come up. I mean, there are seats in, Airfon, which has already gone through, had a majority of 92. Ceredigion, which had a majority of 104. These seats, that's half of Plaid seats, are held up by just under 200 votes. So you've got this issue where Plaid don't actually have a massive amount of votes holding on to their majority, but they're still able to grasp hold of those seats, and that's because of our electoral system.
Yeah. So perhaps it's a little too early to call what Plaid Cymru's gains or losses may be, because as you said, it's so marginal that you might have several recounts in those seats.
Yeah. And another one that's held their seat, Jeremy Hunt, the candidate for leadership of the Conservative Party only a few months ago, has kept his seat in Surrey South West. Obviously, it was a very safe seat. He had a majority of 21,000 beforehand. It's now dropped to 8. So
8,000.
8,000, not 8 votes, obviously. Yeah,
that would be a shock.
But the Lib Dems have done exceptionally well in getting up to 23,000 votes there. However, there were no other opposition parties there besides the Lait Party running. So you've got this. It demonstrates here that when you have a Remain alliance, essentially with the Lib Dems and the Greens holding here in Surrey West and not competing against each other, you have a much better chance, albeit not realistic, but much better chance of ousting the Conservative Party. Yeah.
But how influential then is Nigel Farage's choice to stand down Brexit candidates in Conservative-held places? Because if the case for Surrey South West were that there was another Brexit candidate, that would likely split the Tory vote even further, and that majority we see at 8,000, which you've said has fallen significantly, could be less. So
I think as we saw when we were speaking about the seats in the North East, if the Brexit Party weren't standing in these Labour heartlands, the Conservatives may have won more seats. They may have had increased majorities of 6, 7, 8,000.
Has Nigel Farage given Boris Johnson his majority that he wanted?
He may have given Boris Johnson the majority he wanted, but Nigel Farage is still lacking the seat that he wanted. Nigel Farage has still, after over 20 years of trying, never won a seat in Westminster.
But don't worry, he's not a career politician.
That's true, he's not a career politician. However, we are 2/3 of the way there, not in this show, but in the election overall. 414 seats have been declared out of the 650, and out of those, Labour have lost 43 seats. The Conservatives have gained 32 seats, the SNP have gained 11. The Lib Dems have not changed at all. The DUP have lost 2, which is significant for the Tory party if they had a small majority. And other parties have gained 2. The DUP effect, that's an interesting one. The DUP losing a couple of seats in places they possibly weren't expecting to. Could have, if there had been a small majority or a hung parliament, have actually had a real effect. Yeah. They've lost these seats to the Alliance Party, Remain, very strong Remain party,
which is surprising.
With the Liberal Democrats.
Yeah, I mean the DUP have been influential in almost blocking Boris's Brexit deal going through earlier, and they were key opposition, and possibly influential in helping call this election as well.
Yeah, I think it speaks volumes that we've seen their leader Nigel Dodds not retain his seat. I think his seat was lost to the Alliance or Sinn Féin.
The Alliance Party. Right. Yeah. So there we go. And this is the fact here. You've got 2 leaders now who have been fallen by the electorate, and another one who'll be fallen directly by the electorate. And Boris Johnson and his speech. This is a rather poignant quote. Before we go down to the count. We'll have an interview down there with our correspondent. So Johnson said, it's a historic election and a chance to change the country for the better and unleash the potential of the whole country. If the polls are right, that work will be tomorrow. Not tomorrow, today. Realising that actually it is past midnight and we are still up and still doing things. But we're going to go down now to the Count and down to the Count Centre at Loughborough Leisure Centre, just under a kilometre away from us now, where we got an interview with the returning officer.
So I'm here with the returning officer. So I guess first question is, what does your job entail?
Okay, so my job means that I'm legally responsible for the running of the election. I'm the acting returning officer, so that means that I have responsibility for organising today's poll and for the verification of the votes and then the counting of the votes and ultimately declaring the result once we've been through that process.
So how do you go about counting? Because obviously there's tens of thousands of votes in here. That's a lot of votes to count.
It is. So what we do, as you can see, we're organised into two separate constituencies here. We've got the Charnwood constituency and the Loughborough constituency, and each of those constituencies is now broken down into mini count areas. So you can see we've got different teams set up, and the counters in those teams will collate the votes into individual piles for the individual candidates, and then what they'll do is they'll bundle those up into 25s and then into hundreds, and then there's be what's called oddments, which is where you've got ones, twos and threes. They count those as an individual, and then those counts are checked and countersigned, and then the supervisor will check those bundles to make sure they're all right, and then at the end they'll total them back up to the verification sheet that they've been given, which will match what was in the ballot boxes. That's the theory. It usually works pretty well.
Does it sometimes form a bit of a logistical nightmare to get, I mean, Loughborough is quite a small constituency, but some of them in Scotland are huge. Is it a logistical nightmare sometimes to get all of the ballot boxes to the one place?
Yes, it can. So whilst Loughborough is quite small geographically, we also cover the wider Charnwood area. So we have some polling stations which are actually outside of our district area altogether, in places like Groby and Kirby Muxloe. So we also have to work with our neighbouring authorities to make sure that we have those polling stations and those boxes coming back into the count hall here. So there's quite a lot of work that goes on in preparing the whole process for probably weeks on end beforehand to get that right. And this issue for us this time round, this was a snap election, so we only had 5 weeks to organise it, which means it puts a lot of pressure on the central team who have done a fantastic job to get it organised in the way they have done.
So what motivates you and all of the people here at the count to stay up until 5 a.m. to count bits of paper?
It's the sheer joy of democracy. To be fair, I think the team are very committed to their jobs, to the sense of democracy and actually making sure that there is a really robust election that people can rely on. It is a core part of our country, it's a core part of our culture and our governance, and whilst it might sound a bit trite, we do actually believe in that and we do want to make it work.
And I think, final question, you see all of the people here of all the different political parties all mingling together. It's a surprisingly good atmosphere, I find.
It is a good atmosphere, and I've been really pleased to see what I feel has been a very mature and very good approach from all of the different parties in both the Charnwood and the Loughborough constituency. Quite rightly, they've had differences of opinion on policy issues, but from what I can see, it's not become personal in any sense, and I think that is a really positive thing given what we've seen perhaps more nationally in some of the issues around behaviour and tone and tolerance, and I'm very pleased to say that we haven't seen any issues, to my knowledge, in Charnwood or Loughborough.
Thank you very much, and I hope you get a very good sleep tomorrow.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there we go. Thank you very much to Rob, the returning officer in Charnwood, a vital role to play in any election. Thank you so much to him for letting us there in the count today. We should have the result imminently. It is gone 4 o'clock. It is time to have those results soon. There'll be this Charnwood constituency first, if we go off of a previous expectation, and then the Loughborough constituency afterwards, and we'll bring you both of those results as they come in. However, we've got more gains as well. Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath has been gained by the SNP from Labour, and there's been a few others as well. The Labour, and then that's the Labour shadow Scottish secretary. So Labour's most senior Scottish minister shadow minister has been ousted by the SNP. If that doesn't say anything about the state of Scotland now and like the real desire from some for independence.
Exactly, and this raises questions of which political party is in most or understands their electorate the most. And based on results tonight, it seems like the SNP, who wanted to call this election, clearly understand their electorate far better than any of the other parties. I mean, the whole point of the Conservatives and Labour both thinking they're in touch with their electorate. I think just because whether they think it's Brexit or not, maybe they don't actually understand their electorate going forward, because the Conservatives, I don't think anyone was expecting them to mop up as many seats as they are at the moment. So maybe there is this idea of Brexit is far more deep-rooted than anyone first thought.
Yeah, certainly. And we're seeing that especially in the northeast, where we're seeing large amounts of Brexit Party, but also like huge Tory swings, where Labour have admittedly not had a very strong, very palatable Brexit position.
Yeah.
And if some voters in the northeast that has just tipped them way over the edge, and they've said, well, sorry Labour, I've voted for you for the past 10 years, but this time they've decided that Brexit is the key issue, and that's what they want delivered.
And even the viewpoints of people who might have said that, look, we've had and Joe Swinson's view of we've had 2 years or 3 years now of this Brexit kind of debate, and nothing's come of it. And the whole idea of arguments saying people didn't vote for this, people didn't vote for that. Clearly, they haven't voted to try and change that result. So, yeah, it's very interesting how this is all unfolding.
But equally, it's not a complete whitewash. We're seeing people like David Lammy in Tottenham holding on to his seat with a 30,000 majority. Yeah. Yvette Cooper in Normanton, Pontefract and Castleford holding on to her seat. With only a 1.2k majority, which is rather low.
And that's a person who could now potentially be the next leader of the Labour Party.
Interesting.
If she chooses.
Laura Pidcock, who was dubbed as one of the rising stars in the Labour Party, she has lost in Durham North West to the Conservatives. Other results coming in from Ashton-under-Lyne. Angela Rayner has held on to her seat, a key shadow cabinet minister. And someone who's been quite prominent in this campaign. So yeah.
But has lost 12.3% of the vote compared to the last time. I think.
Is that a swingometer?
It's not quite, because because the Conservatives have not won the seats. So I'm not. It's not time for the swingometer, unfortunately. Fair. I feel quite bad. The swingometer has 3 bits in it, and I've only been able to use the Labour Conservative one so far. Let's hope throughout the night there is at least a chance to see the other parts of the swingometer.
There's one seat that we did think that might have gone to the SNP this evening, though, that didn't in Scotland. That's Dumfries and Galloway, held by Alistair Jack of the Conservative Party. His majority was cut today from 5,600 to 1,800. We thought it might go further, and he might have lost his seat, but he has held on. Which is an interesting one. I think that's where the polling earlier, the polling is that's why the SNP have potentially lost a few seats compared to what we thought they might have got earlier on. Not particularly performing in the south of Scotland on the borders, where we thought they might have got a few more seats than they normally do.
Yeah, and whether that's a case of constituency boundaries, not representing areas, all sorts of potential issues there. I don't know.
Yeah, and with Scotland, it's always been the hardest seats for the SNP to pick up have been those on the border, because those are the constituencies that would be most affected if Scotland were to ever leave, whatever arrangements were put in place for that.
And moving out of Scotland, another seat we didn't expect to go the way it has, Birmingham Northfield. Although it's a marginal, we didn't expect it to be turned over to the Conservatives. The MRP poll actually had Labour leading with a couple of point majority there. Richard Burden had a 4,000 majority. He's now lost his seat to Gary Sandbrook of the Conservative Party, who now has a majority of 1,640. This is a continual trend across the North and the Midlands of Conservatives losing their seats, Conservatives gaining seats, Labour losing seats. Really significant.
And remember, Boris Johnson made a real targeted effort, and many of the Conservative candidates, of focusing their efforts up in the north of England, where the Leave vote was so strong. And maybe a lack of, hindsight's always beneficial, but Labour's strategy clearly hasn't worked there, and they've lost their core voter base.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. We saw that Jeremy Corbyn launched his youth manifesto here in Loughborough.
Yep.
He clearly thinks that the Midlands are very important.
Loughborough, of course, it's going to be interesting how that goes still.
Of course, because we don't quite yet know which way it's going to go.
Yeah, and whether student votership
will it follow with the general election result as it has for the past, I think it's almost 20 years, or will it be different this year?
Exactly, and another one, another surprise here, Wimbledon. We thought Wimbledon was going to go to the Lib Dems. It hasn't. This is really, really close. Stephen Hammond has held the seat in Wimbledon by a whisker. 38.4% to 37.2%, just over a percent between them. The Lib Dems gaining 22.7% in that seat, and the Conservatives losing 8.1%. That was a place where the Conservatives really thought they'd get it. It's got a pretty big swing as well, 8.1% from the Conservatives and Lib Dems, but still not quite enough to take Wimbledon away from the Conservatives, a seat that the Lib Dems really should have been winning if they were to make any true gains this evening.
And those were the seats that the Lib Dems were targeting at this election. They would have quite liked to have seen a nice big corner of southwest London all coloured yellow or orange.
I mean, where does this put the Liberal Democrat Party now? I mean, what do they need to do now? They've tried to gain a solid foundation in this election of just focusing on the Brexit message and trying to soak up that Remain vote. That clearly hasn't worked, although you could argue their vote share is still up, but the number of seats they've gained is, are pretty unchanged at the moment. So where do we think that Liberal Democrats need to go from here?
If you take it back a month, we were talking about how many seats would they get. Would they get 50? Would they get 60? Would they get 70?
Would we be back to three-party politics?
These
We
are the
don't
numbers
know.
we were really thinking. We're thinking, will they be the kingmakers in a coalition government?
Will it be 2010 again?
Will they be the ones creating the coalition government themselves? We were genuinely asking the question about a month ago of, will the Lib Dems come up with a kind of the same amount of votes as the Labour Party, really? And be able to be kingmakers alongside them and equal partners in a coalition government. And we're now looking at the Lib Dems having no more than 20 seats.
Yeah, and interestingly, so far only 3 Labour MPs have increased their vote share. Apparently, that's still to be confirmed, but yeah, interesting.
Lib Dems and the Labour Party and the DUP, I think it's easy to forget the DUP too. Those 3 parties are the real losers this evening. Although you could argue that the real losers this evening are sitting in the studio at 4:12 a.m. in the morning. But we're the winners, exactly. So we're going to go on to some more results. A lot of these are now holds, especially a lot of Labour holds. There's a large portion of Midland seats. These kind of seats which have a reasonable amount of rural areas, like Loughborough, but also have some significant towns as well, which are able to kind of announce around 4 a.m. in the morning. But we have got another really significant win here for the SDLP from Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland, which means another MP will be sitting in Parliament this year. Obviously, Sinn Féin are an abstentions party. They don't sit in Parliament. So they've gained one extra person in Parliament, which will be really significant for them as a party. The SDLP previously doesn't really have much representation in Parliament. It means that Northern Ireland will have more people sitting there. For those who are maybe unionist, maybe not the those are nationalists, maybe not the best result for them. But interesting, because it'll change that dynamic of you have those seven seats from Sinn Féin that weren't ever used. It's now 6.
You would hope that everyone could agree that another person actually sitting and participating in Parliament is a good thing. I appreciate the Sinn Féin have their reasons for not choosing to take up their seats, but equally it's not bad for Northern Ireland to have more representation in the Commons.
Absolutely. The people working behind us in the gallery have been working hard all evening for the last 5 hours, bringing you the content to your eyes. We've just been speaking at the cameras, and they've been working them all for us. So we're going to go to one of them who are behind us and ask them a little bit more about how it's going. I think we're going to speak to our head researcher. Am I right?
Yep.
How's it going for you this evening?
Yeah, we're plodding along. We're doing well here. Just getting through all the social media that we can find on all of the results at the minute. And as you can imagine, there is a lot. So you have to be really specific with what we feed back to you at the moment.
So what's the hardest bit about researching on a general election night? Is it the overload of information, or is it trying to pick out what's the most useful thing?
It's the overload, because there's so much coming through, so many results get announced at the same time. But then it's, well, is that a bigger swing that you should report on? Obviously, you want to report on Joe Swinson losing his seat, whether Boris Johnson kept his seat, same with Corbyn. So it's just everything all at once, as well as the lack of sleep.
So is the last the most significant part? Then I'm assuming we're not used to staying up this late doing intensive work.
No, it's been a lot of fun though. We've all got on really well here today, and I'm really happy to be a part of the team.
How have your researcher team been doing? Have they been gaining other information for you?
Yeah, so I've been trying to get all of the results, what majority there was, whereas all the other researchers are just trying to find out if there's any stories going on, any quotes that are going on, like Farage spoke earlier, big things that important people are saying, basically.
And what's the most significant seat change that you think's happened today? What's the biggest story of the night?
Jo Swinson losing her seat. Obviously Corbyn resigning, which I think realistically you could have predicted. But I'd probably say Jo Swinson.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening and
And
continue
you.
the good work. Us here in the team in the studio will continue analysing the results until we get that count here in Loughborough. It should be any time soon. But first, let's have a look at some of these Conservative seats that are coming through now. So Beckenham has just come through with an increased majority. Reading West with a decreased majority. Ashfield has now come through with a very large majority as well for Lee Anderson. So there's this kind of mix between these, these home county seats, these Tory majorities, traditional Tory seats. Actually, Ashfield's a gain. Ignore me. Yes, yes. Ashfield's a Conservative gain from Labour. Just a huge majority of 5,700 confused me there. That's a fantastic gain for the Conservative Party there. And in fact, that's very significant. Labour, in a seat they won in 2017, came third in Ashfield. Behind an Ashfield independent and a Conservative candidate with 11,000 votes. Now, if that doesn't tell you how dire the situation is for the Labour Party this evening, I don't know what does. Coming third in a seat which they won in 2017 with a reasonably convincing majority.
Yeah, and I think based on tonight, the Labour Party is going to have to significantly evolve going forward because their strategy clearly hasn't worked. Whilst on the doorstep, manifesto policies might have been popular, whether that's a case of people on the doorstep kind of appeasing whoever's been visiting them, who knows, and whether deep down their feelings related to Brexit or more broader issues, then yeah, it looks like there's going to need to be substantial change.
Now, Ashfield was a seat which had 70% Brexit vote. Had a 70% Brexit vote. The people in that constituency clearly feel that Brexit is the way forward for them. Do you think that's the reason why the Labour candidate was not able, Natalie Fleet was not able to collect the vote that really her predecessor had? Her predecessor may have only had a 441 majority, but that's a fair way away from 5,700.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting as well because obviously many Labour candidates have disagreed with their party's stance on Brexit themselves. So that internal conflict has added another kind of dialogue to the issue. So yeah, I find this incredible.
Because if a Labour candidate knocks on your door and you ask them what their stance is on Brexit, and
it may be different to the party line.
Precisely, they may say, I actually support Brexit, or then what does that say about the party? They're not able to present a united front.
Yeah, which is one thing the Conservatives have been able to do, and especially the fact that they have been able to claim, look, all the Conservative candidates standing in this election are in favour of this deal. So therefore, if you vote for the Conservatives, it is a vote for getting that deal over the line.
What do you think the problem has been with Labour's Brexit strategy? Is it just not clear enough? Was it too clear in its very adamant, we don't really have an opinion kind of stance? If we want to be neutral, we want to stay, we want to appeal to everyone. Was that just a strategy that just didn't work?
I think they just couldn't make their minds up with what they were going to go for. Were they going to go in terms of Brexit? Were they going to be a Remain party? Were they going to be a Leave party? But they ended up just sitting on the fence. And I think, as we can learn from the Liberal Democrats, sometimes sitting on the fence doesn't necessarily get you the place you want to be. I think if we look at in terms of their youth manifesto, looking at like the what some people have referred to as broadband communism, I think it's interesting to see how the people have clearly rejected this sharp swing to the left in terms of the manifesto. And just coming in now, Keir Starmer has kept his seat at Holborn and St Pancras. And I think many people, especially to the centre of the Labour Party, see Keir Starmer as a successor to Tony Blair. In his policies and his gravitas.
Yeah.
It's quite obvious in Parliament when he speaks that the Labour Party remain quiet and listen. And I think...
but he did have a reduced majority, but 3,000, not by,
so
by no
that
means
goes
small
against
one,
the national trend then, definitely.
but only a 3,000 reduction.
Yeah.
St Pancras and Holborn, very, very safe
Yes,
Labour
of
area.
course.
I don't think anyone ever would have questioned that. But again, you'd probably say Warrington was a very safe Labour area.
You would have
and
thought.
that's just been gained by the Conservatives as
Wow.
well. With Fawzia Rashid losing to Andy Carter by 2,000 votes. Although they have managed to hold Birmingham Yardley and Streatham, but at the end of the day, and there's Jess Phillips there in Birmingham Yardley who has kept her seat. Very, very vocal supporter of Jeremy Corbyn.
Interesting result coming from Brighton. So the Green Party, Caroline Lucas has held on to her seat. I believe she's increased her majority quite considerably by over 5%. And both Labour and Conservative vote are down there. And this kind of introduces an interesting point from this election. Would you guys say that this has probably been the greenest election you've witnessed in terms of like policy towards climate change and climate awareness?
I certainly think it's been one of the biggest issues.
It's certainly the biggest issue we've seen. It's had the most prominence out of any of the elections we've had over the past couple of years. I think that's just because of the increased media awareness around climate change. It's getting more and more airtime in the press. It's getting more and more
and it's
into the
definitely a
public
topic that
conscience.
voters are more conscious about when they're voting, which is good to
Clearly,
see.
it's Brighton Pavilion. They will vote Green almost no matter what. But that's the very nature of it. I think the Greens' vote share overall is up, which is good to see. Yeah. It's good to see that people are starting to take the environment seriously. It was interesting that the Conservatives didn't really have any major green policies in their manifesto, and it doesn't seem to have dented them that much.
Yeah. Well, and there's another significant factor here is that the Green Party are very clear on what they stand for. They stand for green politics and green policies. They have a very clear manifesto and a clear idea of what they want to do. However, the Labour Party, in contrast, what do they now want to do? Are they here to represent working class views? Are they here as a Remain party? Are they here, as a kind of a force for social change? Are they here as a force for kind of a socialist future? There are so many different ways that you can interpret Labour policy. And Caroline Flint, who held the seat Don Valley and lost that earlier in the morning today, she'd held that for 22 years. That seat, she'd lost it today to the Conservative Party. Said on stage, what is the point of the Labour Party if we don't respect and represent those working class voices? And I think that's the key thing, is Labour rely on the working class vote. They rely on a working class vote. And if this kind of class-based mentality is being eroded, what do they have to work on?
Well, it's clear that everything's changing. You saw that in the northeast. You've seen that across the country. The Labour vote has shifted somewhat. People are not going where they once did. We had Sajid Javid earlier saying that the Tories are the party of the working class. What kind of language is this that we're getting?
Yeah,
this is
exactly.
unheard of.
And there's interesting talk. I think Kensington, not confirmed yet, I believe, but that may be taken by the Conservatives as well. Interesting result coming in from Edinburgh South. Labour have held on to their seat there, still with a majority of 11,000, with the SNP coming in second place there. Wales, the picture in Wales is looking, again, bleak for the Labour Party. They've lost 6 seats so far, and they've all gone to the Conservative Party. So this has further implications for how maybe the Welsh kind of regional political landscape is changing now as well.
So it's highly likely that will be almost Labour's only Scottish seat. We don't know yet, we obviously can't say yet, but that is the one they held before, and it's probably the one they'll hang on to.
So interestingly, Kensington has been a gain for the Conservatives Party from Labour, which is interesting considering the whole Grenfell Tower tragedy. It's interesting to see that after all the loss and the tragedy, that was some have argued is a fault of the Conservative Party and their local party there. And for the Conservatives to win this seat by a very, very small majority.
I think the very key thing in Kensington, though, is the Liberal Democrats. They had Sam Gumaya, who was a Conservative candidate, running as a Lib Dem, only got 9,000 votes, came third in this election. But that really changed the dynamic of the Kensington election here, when you've got two candidates, Sam Gumaya, Felicity Buchanan, and then Emma Denko, who all kind of have those similar kind of progressive policies. You've got three candidates with very similar views, resulting in a majority of only 150 between the two of them.
That's close. Especially,
it's interesting how it's changed, of course, because last time it was a 20-vote majority, so it's still
incredibly tight.
Very incredibly tight. And also, on another little boffins note here, Theresa May getting re-elected today is the first ex-Prime Minister re-elected as a backbench MP since Jim Callaghan fought the 1983 election and won then.
Wow. Yeah, wow.
Nice little boffins, little electioneering statistic there. I think so many things about this election point back to the 80s and point back to actually what was happening then. It's a very weird election in that sense. But we've had another gain as well. Stoke-on-Trent Central. Stoke-on-Trent going to the Conservative Party. A majority of 670. Gareth Snell, part of the Labour Party, particularly part of the Labour Party movement and momentum on the shadow cabinet recently. I'm not sure if he was currently losing to Joe Gideon there by 670 votes.
Again, a large working class demographic. You would hope that these are the seats that Labour would be holding on to, and yet they're just slipping through their fingers one by one.
At the end of the day, you can now argue, what is the point of the Labour Party if they're unable to hold on to their own core? What is the point of having a party that doesn't have a core base?
Is this election going to show to be an existential threat for the Labour Party? Are we going to see a splinter? I mean, there's already been talk about a lot of Labour candidates moving over to the Liberal Democrat Party, so the outfall of that is yet to be seen as well. I mean, it's going to be hard to predict where the Labour Party is going to go from here, and I think the fallout in the papers and the media over the next few days are going to be very interesting to see.
I think the other aspect you've got to look at as well is these seats that are being lost are not ones which are ordinarily lost, but also not ones that have historically been lost as well. I think that's the big difference as well. There's a lot of people in these areas will be worrying that actually why are these seats, especially Labour voters who are voting Labour still in these seats, worry about what the future is for their constituency, but also worrying what the future is for the country. I mean, they've voted Labour for years, and they've always had a Labour MP championing their views, their social democratic views, their views on welfare, those kind of things. They no longer have that person in Parliament. They will no longer feel like they're represented.
Yeah, and it goes to show that every vote actually counts. You would have gone into some of these seats with 9,000, 10,000 majorities, and you would have said, oh, my vote doesn't matter. It's going to be a safe Labour seat. But yet here we are with about 20 seats which have all been turned over.
And the other problem, I think, is when you look at the Conservative Party now, and you might say, well, they're living the high life now. They are still, I would argue, one of the most divided parties, and will become one of the most divided parties, obviously, as they have to deal with Boris Johnson and the different kind of strategies that he's going to hold. If you look at the Labour Party, they're going to elect a new leader. Hopefully that leader for them will be one that can command more of a consensus in the party. The Conservative Party have this reasonably hard right leader, although he does have a lot of social policies that would be kind of central in terms of the political spectrum. He's a leader that doesn't please, and there's not the appetite of many people in the Conservative Party, as you saw with the Conservative leadership election, when a lot of MPs were very adamantly against Boris Johnson and everything he stood for. Could we inadvertently see the death of both parties, or at least injury to both parties during this next Parliament?
I think it's very interesting what you said earlier when you said that Labour are having these seats and they're going to hold on to them, and that it seems very tricky with the situation that the Labour Party have got themselves into. Where do they go from here?
Yeah, definitely. And on the back of your point, Josh, I do think there has been a personality kind of contest in this election, which has driven a lot of the votes perhaps towards the Conservative Party, whether having Jeremy Corbyn as leader of Labour Party has put off potential voters, and they've thought their vote is more align maybe with the Conservatives, depending on how they maybe voted on Brexit. But yeah, the fallout from this is going to be very interesting, and it's probably going to take a couple of weeks for us to pick through the details.
And the other interesting thing is that actually, if you look at the vote share change since the last election, the party with the biggest increase in the vote is the Liberal Democrat Party.
And this goes back to proportional representation.
Exactly, and you look at actually a lot of these seats are ones which the Liberal Democrats are doing very, very, very well in, but they are still the second party or the third party. They're gaining thousands of votes in these seats. They are technically the most successful party so far in this election after 517 seats have been declared.
But that's not what the headline's going to say tomorrow.
Absolutely not. It's going to be the Liberal Democrats have crashed. They've fallen, despite actually having the largest increase in the share of the vote out of any party so far. Obviously, we'll ignore the Labour Party with their -8%.
I think we can guarantee that is going to be the main story in the papers tomorrow.
Absolutely.
The Lib Dems will be a secondary concern.
Absolutely, but still getting 10.7% of the vote is a huge increase from the last time when they were averaging around 6 or 7%.
Yeah, I mean, what are your guys' views on proportional representation based on, say, European elections? Would that be something you'd want to see here in the UK?
So first past the post gives stable governments. You have a clear government. You most of the time, I think the past few years have been a complete exception. As you see, a clear majority which provides stable government, which helps with the economy, as we've already seen with the pound increase. It helps in terms of getting policies through. But I think it depends what you value more when you're looking at it. Whether if you go for electoral reform, you look at proportional representation that has the benefits of consensus politics and people getting the sorry, my own constituency just announced and the basis that we have that is representative, whether or not you want to vote for the people you want to rather than tactically voting.
Yeah. So of course the voting is distributed by who you have your preference for as well.
Yes, exactly. So I guess it very much depends on what you value more. I mean, what do you personally think, Josh?
I think anything that makes democracy fairer is something that I would go for, something that I'd be for. I think proportional representation is one way of doing that, in making democracy fairer, making every vote count. I think if we don't live in a system where every vote doesn't, but not every vote counts, I think it's an unfair system to live in. Essentially, if you live in a lot of these seats, and we'll go through some of the seats that have the biggest majorities in the country. You're looking at seats like Knowlesy, which has a 42,000 Labour majority. If you're a conservative and you lived in Knowlesy, there's no point in voting. There just isn't any point in voting because you will not surpass a 42,000 vote majority.
You say that,
wow.
but the majorities that have been overturned tonight,
not quite 42,000 votes.
Contrast that with Fife North East with a 2017 majority of 2.
And that therefore means that if you live in Fife, your vote matters so much more than if you lived in East Ham, in Knowlesy, in Bristol West, where they're all above 35,000 in terms of a majority. And actually, if you look at the seats with the highest majority around the country, i.e. the votes that are being wasted the most, they are all Labour constituencies. In fact, the top 30, all of the 30 top majorities in 2017 were all Labour seats. And when you look at this, you're actually looking at a lot of wasted Labour votes which aren't being used productively. If you then go up and you have a look at the seats with the smallest majorities, i.e. the places where the votes are being used the most productively, they are SNP, Conservative, Plaid Cymru, Lib Dem. All of these parties are gaining seats really easily. But, because they're using the votes properly, and people can actually have a say productively, like here in Leicestershire, where a lot of the seats in these small towns like Loughborough actually matter. And that's the important thing. You want your vote to matter wherever you live. And it's not fair for someone, if you live in Fife, to potentially be, you would have been that one person, that one individual person that won that seat. If you were in Fife North East in 2017 and you were wondering whether to vote for the SNP or to vote for Labour, and you voted for the SNP just on a whim rather than Labour, you made that an SNP seat in 2017. That's the significant aspect of that. But if you're someone in Knowlesy, you are one of 40-odd thousand people that made that seat.
Which I think brings us back to what Josh was saying earlier about the boundaries that we're currently living with. We're living, in some parts of the country, we're still living with 2001 boundaries.
We are.
The amount of votes per seat has become vastly disproportional over time as obviously the population changes.
So if you look at the Isle of Wight, for example, the Isle of Wight is now currently the biggest constituency in the country. It's almost 100,000 people in one constituency. Well, if you look at Scotland or North Wales,
it's 20, 30,000 for the smallest.
In Orkney, 30,000 votes. And the fact that if you live in one seat, you are alongside, and your vote counts as much, as 1 in 100,000, and another seat, your vote counts as 1 in 30,000. That's just not fair, is it?
Yeah, we have a breaking story. Former Tory Dominic Greaves, who has been key in the Brexit debate over the past few years, he has lost his seat to a Tory successor. Of course, he was once the party's Attorney General, but was kicked out by Boris Johnson earlier this year after he backed a bill to try and stop a no-Brexit deal. So this year he's run as an independent in his seat of Beaconsfield. And he had previously won support more than 16,000 votes, but now he's been beaten by Tory candidate Joe Morrissey, who has won with 32,000 votes. So another interesting development there.
We're also just hearing the result from Charnwood, which means the Loughborough result will be imminent. We will get that to you when it comes, and we'll get you the video as well from that Charnwood Count too. Essentially, yes, the Conservative Party have won in Charnwood, no surprise there at all. As far as I'm aware, on an increased majority. We'll get you those numbers in a second. But other seats that are being held, Poplar and Limehouse in London, increased Labour majority. Ayrshire Central, increased SNP majority. Stoke-on-Trent South, increased Conservative majority. And that's the thing, in these seats, you're getting massive increased majorities. And other seats, you're getting the complete opposite. It really doesn't, there is really no trend in terms of majority
there's no logic tonight.
Other than that generally Labour are losing votes and generally the Lib Dems and the Tories are gaining votes. That may not translate into seats.
Yeah, interestingly close to home for me, Croydon Central, which is normally can be a swing seat at certain times, is a Conservative. It's a Labour hold this year, which is interesting to see. We'll have to see what Croydon South is in a minute.
So we're going to give you that exact number now from Charnwood. So Charnwood constituency, Edward Argyle, the Conservative, 35,121 votes. Gary Godden, 12,724 votes. Kate Tipton, 4,856 votes. And Laurie Needham, 2,664 votes for the Green Party. Meaning the majority is 22,397, which is an increase of 6,000 on his majority. Edward Argyle there staying as the Charnwood member. Derby North, another Conservative gain from Labour here. Amanda Soloway taking 21,000 votes. So Tony Tinley's 18,000. Big change there.
I mean, what more can we say is that the Conservatives have wiped the floor of this election. I think it's interesting to note that in Charnwood the turnout was 69.6%, which is on average higher than most constituencies. So whether or not that was because of a possible student vote, with some of our students being outside of the constituency boundaries of Loughborough, it's hard to say. But if it's similar in the Loughborough constituency, I think that will be probably the most interesting statistics out there.
Yeah, as you say, Charnwood is the constituency which represents almost all the outlying villages around Loughborough. So you've got Sileby, Corn, Shepshed, Belton, all of those villages, basically all the way up to East Midlands Airport, are represented. So it's quite a broad constituency with a lot of varying people in it.
We can also now announce that it is exactly 40 votes until the Conservatives, 40 seats, until the Conservatives have a absolute majority in the House of Commons for the 2019 to 2025, I assume, election. Or 2024, depending on how they interpret electoral law at the time. It may very well be a revocation.
Does it mean we have a winter election in 5 years' time?
No. So currently we live under the electoral. What's it called?
Fixed Term Parliament Act.
My degree has gone out of my head. It's 4 a.m. in the morning. The Fixed Term Parliament Act, which means that elections must be held 5 years afterwards in May, which would probably put it in 2024. Depending on the interpretation of electoral law, which doesn't really
would you
count.
Go after or would you go before the 5 years? Right, yeah.
It should be before the 5 years. So I would assume we'll be looking at 2024, which would mean a essentially a 4-year Parliament term. However, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party have both been able to scrap the Fixed Term Parliaments Act and return to how it was beforehand, with essentially the Parliament being able to decide, the government being able to decide themselves how long they would like their Parliament to be, as long as it doesn't go over 5 years. So we could end up having an election in a few years' time, depending on when Boris Johnson thinks it's politically strategic.
And you were saying there was only 40 seats left. We've just seen Grant Shapps hold on to his seat in William Hatfield.
Chairman.
Yeah. Taunton Dean, Rutland and Melton, all Conservative Party are holding on to these seats.
Held Conservative, and Milton Keynes South.
Milton Keynes, of course.
We are getting very, very close to be able to state that this election has been won by the Conservative Party, but not quite yet. In theory, it could all change, and the Labour Party could start winning all the seats. It's very, very unlikely, but it's possible. In Gillingham and Rainham, the Conservatives have held that seat there with, again, an increased majority, 28,000 for the Conservative Party. Interestingly, no Brexit Party there, but UKIP were running in that seat, getting 837 votes. UKIP is still attempting to be in the political scene, not particularly well.
See, this has been very confusing to me, this election, in that you have the Brexit Party and UKIP not necessarily always running in the same seats. They seem to have picked which seats they would rather run in.
It seems to be a lot of the seats that the Brexit Party have stepped down in due to a Conservative incumbent. The UKIP seem to be running in those seats. Whether that's just accidental or deliberate, I'm not sure, but that seems to be the way it's seemed to have worked out. Coventry North East has been held by Labour and Colleen Fletcher with a majority of 7,692. A lot of Labour MPs probably feeling very sad about their colleagues coming into the next couple of weeks. They'll be returning to Parliament next week.
Well, they'll be returning without many of their colleagues who they've built up relationships and friendships with.
Depending on if there is a majority and if the government is accepted by the Queen, it may look like we have Parliament back on Monday or Tuesday.
They're going to bother the Queen on Saturday.
They'll bother the Queen this afternoon on a Friday. So
yeah, it's only just turned Friday.
Only Friday.
The sun will be coming up soon.
Ilford North has been held by Labour. That's Wes Streeting, a very prominent member of the Labour Party there. It'd be interesting to see where he puts his flag in terms of running for Labour leadership. It's possible that he could insert himself as a candidate in that race.
I honestly, this is the first time I've heard of him. So
well, he's not doing very well then, is he?
I'll be honest. Considering I do a politics degree, I hardly know any members of the shadow cabinet. I think it's because it changes so often.
Does anyone know any members of the shadow cabinet? Really?
I don't really know any members of the cabinet.
Apart from Diane Abbott, of course.
Well, yes, Diane Abbott.
Nick Gibb, who is the Minister of State for Education, he has just won his seat over in Bognor Regis and Littlehampton. With a huge majority of 22,000. As far as I'm aware, no Conservative minister has lost their seat, whereas I think 3 or 4 of the Labour shadow cabinet have lost their seats this evening. And obviously the Lib Dems have lost a key figure, as well as
and the
DUP losing their leader in Westminster too.
The DUP have also lost their deputy leader as well, so they're doing even worse than we originally thought.
It is not a good night for the DUP. Do you think that's... There could be a few reasons for this. Do you think it's the lack of support for the Brexit deal that Boris Johnson's put through? Do you think it's a lack of reason for this kind of lack of liking the antagonistic way that they've operated with Parliament, the kind of contempt they might have shown for some members of their constituencies?
I think there's a certain amount of both of those in there. I think, to be honest, just by the sheer fact that they entered into a confidence and supply agreement with the Tory party has probably done them most of the damage by supporting the Brexit deal, which in Northern Ireland is, I think it's fair to say, is not especially popular. Boris's deal is not the best for Northern Ireland. Theresa's deal was, albeit slightly better, maybe it definitely wasn't perfect by any means. But I think that's mostly where they've lost their support.
Yeah, no, I echo that. And I think based on previous elections and fallout from that, any minority party that is going into coalition with another party has not ended well. Liberal Democrats being prime
We saw it in
example.
2015.
Indeed. But it's interesting seeing these results come in now. It looks like the Prime Minister's gamble has paid off. It looks like he's going to get his working majority that he wants, and you know the outcome of this could be that we could be leaving the EU within the next month.
Do you think he'll push forward for that exit date at the end of January? You know, even with a majority, it still looks very unrealistic that he'll be able to keep that time frame. Do you think that's vital? He's already delayed Brexit once, despite promising not to.
Well, twice.
Twice. Sorry,
Well, not himself, sorry.
Not himself, but he personally
the
has
Tory
delayed
party.
Brexit once.
I agree. That's an interesting point actually. But I think based on how he's tried to run this campaign, he won't want to start off on the wrong foot.
So he ran his leadership campaign on the slogan "Get Brexit done." He did not get Brexit done.
But he tried to portray that wasn't his fault. That was Parliament blocking his deal.
He's now running, and he's won a majority in Parliament. We are almost sure of that now. If he doesn't win this time, if he can't win against the EU and Parliament itself, and you know all reason and logic, and get us out of the EU at the end of January, how can he possibly say he's got Brexit done and command the support of not only the electorate but Parliament itself?
I think how the next few months pan out are going to be critical. One, to trust issues based on politicians, and obviously I think the electorate have given Boris Johnson a second chance here because there's been a lot of echo chambers in the media and online where people have been saying their faith in politics has run out. They have fed up with the system. They want reform. They want change, but the electorate on the majority has given Boris a second chance, and I think if he doesn't follow through on his pledges, he will suffer.
But I think the thing is, at the end of the day, it's not just the electorate that matters. You have to have all of his Conservative Party MPs on his side willing to get Brexit done.
Yeah.
And I'm really unsure myself whether he would actually have that mandate. Granted, he's run his whole campaign on get Brexit done.
He's also claimed that every single MP in his party, he has signed a pledge to say they will support any Brexit deal that he puts forward.
That is a
big
claim.
Big claim.
Whether that will actually come to fruition.
There are definitely MPs that I know in the Conservative Party who would not support Boris Johnson's Brexit deal in their hearts.
Right.
Whether they do in reality is a different story.
And whether they have done that purely from a campaigning point of view, we'll find out.
Well, you can look at all of the Conservative MPs that have run as independents so far, and I believe there are a couple still left to go. None of them have won their seats. They've come close, but none of them won their seats. This shows that if you are running as a Conservative, not as part of the Conservative Party, you cannot win. You cannot win an election against a Conservative, and whether they're incumbent or not, whether they're slandering you from the rooftops, you can't do it. So this kind of proves to MPs in there that if they want to keep their seat at the next election, if they want to stay an MP and enjoy all the benefits and salaries an MP gets, you've got to keep with the Tory line.
He's already shown that if you break the Tory line, he is more than happy to remove the whip from you. He's done that to several members of the cabinet, several members of the party. He's laid his cards on the table. So if you're running as a...
Yeah, it's interesting that whether that has been pressure from his political advisor Dominic Cummings, which some people have thought that might be the case, or whether that has been a personal decision of his own, who knows?
Yeah.
Another interesting result is Craig McKinley from Thanet South. He's won his seat again. He first stood in 2017 and was then under criminal investigation for a year based on electoral spending. He was then it was turned over and it was all put back in there. But it's interesting that he is still running. He's still running an election and still winning an election after being accused of electoral breaking electoral spending rules. Very interesting.
Interestingly, the Conservatives have gained Newcastle-under-Lyme from Labour with a majority of 7,500.
There's a lot of very interesting results coming in now, especially ones which may not affect the entire picture on their own, but collectively are rather important.
Yeah, Liz Truss in Norfolk South West has managed to hold on to her seat with a majority of 26,000.
Liz Truss with a famous speech about cheese and why cheese is so vitally important.
Do we think she'll stay in the cabinet?
I think, this is the interesting thing of whether Boris Johnson will leave his cabinet be, as far as I'm aware, he's not lost anyone in cabinet, will he leave it be? or will he decide to do a shake-up before Christmas or just after Christmas between Christmas and New Year? He's perfectly within his rights to. He will be granted, as long as the Conservatives win this majority, he will be granted a government by the Queen. Not that he really needs to be granted it. He currently is the Prime Minister. And it'll be very interesting to see where this kind of dynamic with cabinet goes, because he's chosen currently a cabinet which does accommodate a couple of different views. Had people like Nicky Morgan in it, who remain people at our heart. So we'll see how these kind of go in a few weeks ahead. Looking at what a lot of people are saying is that we might be waiting until January or February until a proper redo of his cabinet and a reshuffle. But it could be early. It depends on how harsh he wants to be on his MPs.
I think if he kept his cabinet, it would be a show of trust in that they've already served him well. But as you said, the cabinet he's currently got is a mix of views, because slowly, as time has progressed with Brexit, many of the ex-cabinet members have resigned from their positions. So he's kind of got to the point where he's kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel for the people he would willingly have in his cabinet.
Well, he's absolutely going to have a new person to replace Nicky Morgan.
Yes.
As he will. There's a couple of other ministers who have resigned before, so he will have to pick people up. The likelihood is he'll promote people within that department, but he could bring other people in as well. There are some experienced people who've been elected. I doubt that newly elected people will come straight into the cabinet. It's been done before, but it's unlikely.
It's unlikely.
It's only ever happened
not
really
very
when a
common.
candidate's lost an election before and has been re-elected. So it'd be interesting to see how they go and how his cabinet is formed. Do you think he'll go for a Brexit-heavy cabinet?
I don't see why he wouldn't. He's campaigned on it. If he's campaigned on Brexit, although is it the keep your friends close and your enemies closer sort of deal, I think he's got a safe enough majority that he wouldn't have to go down that attitude. I definitely think that Boris Johnson's going to, whether or not he changes his cabinet around, I wouldn't be able to give you an answer on that, but I think he's definitely going to come into this at a stronger position, and therefore will be more blazon with the MPs who, even in the backbenches, who held so much power over the Conservative Party and the government beforehand. Now, with this majority, it's much in the way that Tony Blair can ignore could ignore his backbench MPs. It's the same way that I think Boris Johnson could ignore his backbench MPs.
And this is the thing. Now he has this kind of buffer zone where he's got these MPs who he's able to play around with and kind of allow him to do slightly more radical things that maybe his entire party wouldn't support. So, we'll see how that goes in terms of,
Because we're predicting that he'll have a majority of at least 30 MPs.
Well, by the looks of it, it may be more than that.
To Labour, that would be about 70 MPs.
Around 60 or 80 majority.
We've just had some interesting results in from Aberdeenshire West and Kincard. Are you gonna call that?
No, I think we'll hold on that one for a second.
So Conservatives have managed to hold on to this against the SNP with a majority of 843. So that resurgent SNP hasn't quite managed to pip the Conservatives there.
And Lib Dems have also kept Edinburgh
Edinburgh
West as well,
yeah,
which is a surprise here. We thought that one might have gone to the SNP too. Christine Jardine, who is a very experienced Lib Dem MP, has held that seat. We also hear we will have video soon from the Loughborough constituency count. We'll let you know when we have that video for you of the results. But currently going on, Banbury have gone Conservative hold. Main Valley Conservative hold. Worthing Eastern Shoreham Conservative hold. Aberdeenshire has stayed Conservative, obviously, as you said, despite a really big push for the SNP there. Chatham and Aylesford as well, and Devon Central. All of these coming in the last 3 or 4 minutes. So many seats coming in now, all Conservative.
So perhaps we're not going to see the quite resurgent SNP that the exit poll quite strongly predicted. Maybe a couple of seats less than that, but I think we can still fairly safely say that the SNP are going to have an increased majority in Scotland, if nothing else.
Yeah, we've had some interesting talk as well on BBC Radio from Yvette Cooper, saying that there is real danger that Labour is becoming a party for cities and not for towns across Britain. She also doesn't deny that she would consider standing for leader again. So some interesting perspectives coming in.
I think the numbers certainly back that up. We've seen that in London especially, Labour has actually maintained its seats, the same in Birmingham, the same in Manchester. They've actually done quite well they've maintained all the seats that they had. Whereas it is the towns and the outliers that they're losing.
And Conservatives are now at 312, so not far off the 326 that are required.
And there we go, we have the results now for the Loughborough constituency, what you've been waiting for a while. They're on your screen there. The video, for some reason, we don't have yet. We'll get that to you as soon as possible. Our team will get that sorted as soon as possible. But the results were Queenie T with 235 votes as an independent. The Labour Party, Stuart Brady with 20,785 votes. The Conservative Party, 27,954 votes. The Liberal Democrats, 4,153 votes. And the Green Party, 1,504 votes, with 45 spoiled, 175 invalid votes, with a 68.8% turnout. That's the Loughborough result there. For today, that means Jane Hunt will be the next Conservative MP with a majority of 7,169. That is, I believe, an increased majority. It is an increased majority by 3,000 votes.
It's very, very interesting. I think it's, as we saw from the interview we had with Stuart in the last part, he was feeling fairly deflated. I think he already knew at that point the way the result was going from what he'd seen in the count. So I don't think it's any surprise to us here, but it is. I think we'd hoped that the student vote would be stronger.
Do you think Stuart relied too much on the student vote?
I think he relied very heavily on the student vote. Certainly, he was the only candidate that I actually saw actively campaigning on campus.
Well, I've seen a large number of people I know have postally voted to their home constituency. Like I know, Josh, you postally voted back in, was it Ipswich? Yeah. So I think with students, it's very hard to have an accurate representation of them coming out to vote and then voting necessarily Labour. I personally know quite a few students who have the shy Tory effect. They're not going to openly admit to all of their friends that they vote for the Conservative Party.
Because it's the additional effort, right? You're already registered in your home constituency. Getting a postal vote is relatively straightforward.
Yeah.
If you have to register a new constituency, you have to register your new address, it just adds an extra hurdle to things.
Yeah. But I think there's one thing we can say is that is an increased majority, a considerably increased majority there. I think that's a very important factor to look at, is that Loughborough, as we kind of expected from the start, looking at the exit poll, has gone along with the national trend. I don't think this is an individual candidate's fault. This is the party as a whole kind of failing from the inside currently.
Yeah, but what I find fascinating is that ever increasingly, voters vote on a national basis.
Yes.
They don't vote locally, whereas based on the responses we had from our question time and how the candidates performed there was very little focus, in my opinion, on local issues. So what people would expect to change in their constituency, and I think that has been lost, in part maybe due to the influence of social media and a greater presence of political campaigning online, which brings me on to a separate point of that it's clear that the fake news and the adverts that may have been taken down, particularly on the Conservative part, but also the scrutiny that Boris Johnson has been under to face people like Andrew Neil, claims he was hiding in a fridge to avoid interviews, hasn't cut through, which I'm surprised by.
But it's clear here that actually maybe people don't really care as much about the kind of the news media and what people are saying about it and the critical analysis that people like us will give politicians. The general public clearly just don't care as much as we'd hope.
I think it's been interesting over the past couple of weeks seeing the research that the university has put out as they've analysed the week's news reports, and week on week we've seen that Labour have had a comparatively huge number of negative press compared to the Tories and compared to the other major parties.
But before we go on, let's take a look now at the Loughborough constituency count.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, I have the declaration of result of poll for the election of a Member of Parliament for Loughborough on Thursday the 12th of December 2019. I, Rob Mitchell, being the acting returning officer at the above election, do hereby give notice that the number of votes recorded for each candidate at a said election is as follows. Boone Sally Edwina, commonly known as T. Queenie, Independent, 235. Brady Stuart James, commonly known as Brady Stewart, Labour Party, 20,785. Hunt Jane Marion, the Conservative Party candidate, 27,954. Sharp Ian Roberts, Liberal Democrats, 4,153. Walton Wesley George, commonly known as Walton Wes, Green Party, 1,504. The number of ballot papers rejected was as follows. For want of an official mark, 0. Voting for more candidates than the voter was entitled to, 45. Writing or mark by which the voter could be identified, 0. Being unmarked or wholly void for uncertainty, 175. A total number of rejected ballot papers of 220. The electorate was 79,764, with ballot papers issued 54,851, with a turnout of 68.8%. So I do hereby declare that Jane Marion Hunt is duly elected. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm just going to go through some thank yous as well. So thank you to Rob, the returning officer, the election team, clerks, presiding officers and counting staff for all their hard work today, yesterday as well, of course, and in the weeks before. Many thanks also to the police, particularly Mark, who are involved in the election process. If you are a caretaker of a school or the holder of keys at a church hall and had a very early start yesterday morning, thank you. Thank you to my superb campaign team and agent, and my wonderful family for all their hard work in the rain, wind, even hail, when the weather app said, sunny with light showers. Thank you to the retiring Member of Parliament, Nicky Morgan, who has helped throughout the campaign, is an exemplary individual and a stalwart friend. Most importantly, thank you to everyone who took the time to vote for any of the candidates. Your participation is much appreciated by all of us. The people of Loughborough told me again and again on their doorsteps to get on with it and get Brexit done. So as I become a fully fledged member of Team Loughborough, I very much look forward to doing exactly that. Thank you.
There we go. So the new Conservative Member of Parliament for Loughborough, replacing Nicky Morgan, is Jane Hunt, and she will be taking her place in Parliament in the next 3 or 4 days and taking her oath there. Guys, what's your reaction to this one?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a bit of a hard-fought battle in Loughborough. I think the students, certainly, we've been preached to more by Labour than we have the Conservatives, but it's quite clear that as a whole, the entire constituency, the town, the students, everybody, that's who we've got behind.
I think it'll be interesting to see the breakdown by kind of age category and who's voted here, and whether the election being called in this late in term time may have had an effect, with students perhaps going home or voting by post back home. Yeah, there are loads of different implications, but to see that in what's been labelled as a key battleground state, that if Labour wanted to make any inroads, they needed to take Loughborough, and it turns out the Conservatives has significantly increased their majority here.
If it's, as we know, it's a bellwether seat. Whichever party has control of the government, they win this seat, and this is again proven to be the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's quite interesting that both candidates here had. I think there was quite a lot of respect for them from the electorate, in that Jane Hunt has been a councillor for several years on Charnwood Council, and Stuart Brady has a wealth of experience that is relevant to the role. So I think both candidates were actually quite well suited to the role. It's just happened that as Loughborough has a bellwether, along with apparently most of the rest of the country, have decided that that's the way we've gone this evening.
Exactly, and it's a national picture as well. It seems that we, across the country, we have this very national picture of the Conservatives taking the lead and becoming the next party of government properly this time, not in a coalition or any kind of decision.
Or any kind of confidence and supply arrangement, or they will actually have a majority to work off, which is rapidly approaching. I think we're 4 seats away currently.
And I think we'll know very soon whether they've got that majority or not.
Yes.
In fact, in a few minutes' time. Josh, this national picture, the local picture, do you see them? Do you see them colliding? Places like Sheffield, places like Nottingham, where actually the Conservatives have taken hold and have taken root in places which traditionally would be student strongholds.
Yeah. Part of me questions whether this is a Boris effect, going back to debate of whether this is an election over personalities. Who knows at this point? But I definitely think maybe having Boris as the figurehead for the Conservative parties may have aided them, which is surprising given the trust issues that have been headlining in the media. But I think at this point the main thing is that it's clear to see that people are fed up with how politics have been going for the last 3 years, and Brexit has been key to that. So this has clearly been a defining vote on them wanting to get this out of the way.
And this Brexit issue, the issue with essentially this massive issue of Brexit, is what has stemmed this election and what has driven this election from behind.
Let's not forget this election was called on the back of Parliament not wanting to vote Boris Johnson's deal through in admittedly the very short time frame that had been put forward. So I think that the electorate have given Boris a second chance, and how this is going to play over at the next few months could dictate the success of maybe his tenure as Prime Minister and years to come.
However, we can now officially confirm that the Conservative Party have a majority in the House of Commons. With the election of Marco Longy from Dudley North, that now confirms that the Conservative Party have the 327 seats necessary to command a majority in the House of Commons. It'll be the first time they've done this since 2017, when they lost their majority under a bid by Theresa May to command an even larger majority. It's yet to see this evening how many votes they'll get, but the count is likely to be bigger, possibly around 60 or 70 seat majority. From all of our team tonight, we thank you for being here, for your words of wisdom, and obviously for everyone in the gallery as well. It's been a fantastic night. Thank you all for your help and assistance today.
Right. Bowl's over. It's just gone.
Thank you very much to everyone who has helped out, but also for all of you watching at home. It's been a long one. It's past 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm not sure whether I'm going to go to my lecture tomorrow or not, but we'll see. Thank you all very much for watching, from you in the gallery and from us here in the studio. Good night.